83. The Cycle of Life. Hello everybody! Today we will start with a new lesson which is about the cycle of life. You already know that habitat is an area where any organism lives and can find food, water, shelter and protection. There are many types of living organisms that live in the same habitat. So, different types of organisms eat different types of food where a flow of energy occurs. To start our lesson, answer these questions. When I ask the question, pause the video for several minutes and try to answer the question on your own then listen to my answer. My first question is, can animals or plants live alone without being dependent on each other? The answer is absolutely no. My second question is, why do they have to depend on each other? The answer is, living organisms, in order to survive, they need to get energy and to eat. My third question is, can you give me some examples that show how animals and plants depend on each other? For example, in this figure, I have a caterpillar eating green leaves. And in this figure, I have a tit eating a caterpillar. Let's take another example. The grasshopper eats the grass. And the frog eats the grasshopper. Then the snake eats the frog. Finally, the eagle eats the snake. This figure shows the above information, and this figure is called a food chain. So what is a food chain? Every organism needs energy to live. Plants get energy from the sun. Some animals eat plants and be called herbivorous animals, while other animals eat each other and can be called carnivorous animals. And in this way, living organisms get energy. In a food chain, we can see the feeding relationship between living organisms in nature. It shows who eats whom in order to obtain food. So in a food chain, we can see living organisms, each one eating the preceding one. It is made up of many links. Each link is eaten by the one that follows it. For example, in this figure, link 1 shows a leaf eaten by a caterpillar, which is link 2. The arrow means eaten by. Link 2, which is the caterpillar, is eaten by link 3, which is a tit bird. The tit bird is eaten by the buzzard, which is link 4. So food chain is a series of living organisms, each dependent on the next as a source of food. Or food chain is a series of living organisms, each one eats the one preceding it as a source of energy. Observe this figure carefully. We have a green leaf and a caterpillar. In your opinion, how do green plants get their food? We know that green plants get their food by photosynthesis. They convert sunlight into energy in addition to their need to water, minerals, and carbon dioxide in order to produce their own food. So we call the green plants producers. So producers are the plants that are able to produce their own food. Now let's move to the caterpillar. How do caterpillar gets food? Caterpillar eats green leaves, so it gets its food by eating green leaves. Since the caterpillar is unable to produce its own food and depend on the leaf to take energy, so we call it consumer. Consumer is an organism that feeds on plants or other animals for energy. In this food chain, we have producers and different consumers. Leaf is a producer because it produces its own food and is the first link in this food chain. Caterpillar is a primary consumer. Consumer because it is unable to produce its food, and it is called the primary consumer because it is the first organism that consumes food. The tit is a secondary consumer because it is unable to produce its own food, and it is called secondary consumer because it is the second organism that consumes food. The tertiary consumer in this figure is the buzzard because it is unable to produce its food, and it is called tertiary consumer because it is the third organism that consumes food in this food chain. So, the first link is always that producer because it is the only link that produces its own food. Note, the sun is the source of energy for producers. And the second link, which is the primary consumer, always herbivore because the herbivorous animals can only eat plants. While the third link, which is the secondary consumer, and the fourth link, which is the tertiary consumer, are carnivores or omnivores because they either eat animals alone or they eat animals and plants. In any food chain, we have a producer in the first link, and the last link is a consumer and can be called predator. Predator is an animal that eats other animals. So we have to memorize the first component or link in the food chain is always a plant and called producer, and the other components or links of a food in a food chain are called consumers. If we look at these food chains, in the first figure we have link 1 plant, link 2 insect, link 3 mouse, link 4 owl. The plant is eaten by the insect and the insect is eaten by the mouse, then the mouse is eaten by the owl. How many links do we have in this food chain? We have 4 links. In the second food chain we have link 1, link 2, link 3, link 4, link 5. So we have 5 links in this food chain. So we conclude that the number of links varies from one chain to another depending on the number of organisms present in the food chain. So what we need to memorize? Food chain. Food chain is a series of different living things. Each one eats the one preceding it. It starts with a green plant which is eaten by an animal and ends with a predator. The arrow means eaten by. The last example we will take about the food chain of an owl. The food chain of an owl, the producer is the green leaf, which is the first link. The producer or the green leaf is eaten by the insect, which is the primary consumer, and it is the second link. The insect is eaten by the mouse, which is the secondary consumer, and it is the third link. Then the mouse is eaten by the owl, which is considered as the tertiary consumer and the fourth link. Finally, what do we mean by food web? Or how can we distinguish a food chain from a food web? The food web is the natural interconnection of food chain. So, a food web is a group of many food chains interconnected together. Thanks for watching. I hope you understand the lesson. If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask me. I miss you so much.